Hey everyone, Christopher here for part 2 of LJ's interview. If you haven't checked out our first interview, links in the description below. Today we're talking about his personal gaming channel and what inspires him to inspire others. But before we do, let's roll that beautiful B-roll. LJ, welcome back for part 2 of your interview.
I'm glad to be here.
So for those of you who did not get the last interview, LJ, if you could, just introduce yourself.
So my name is LJ Lowery. I am an employee at the UPS store, which we discussed before, but I am also president of a nonprofit organization called Geeks Under Grace.
I am really excited to talk about that. Now, in our previous interview, one of the things you mentioned is that you worked at the Bayou Church, which is located in Lafayette, Louisiana, and I'll just assume that there's probably a correlation between that, employment and the title Geeks Under Grace. Tell me a little bit about how you came to start that organization, what's about.
So I actually didn't initially start Geeks Under Grace. The original founder started out of Washington, which is where our nonprofit status still exists. And but I came to Geeks Under Grace through Facebook, and it was neat to just find a community that was into the same stuff I was, but also had a faith-centric, system and. So people with faith in Christ and stuff like that are still geeking out about video games and anime and TV and movies and a lot of stuff that can be looked at and say, oh, that's demonic or that's evil or something like that, or that's unhealthy spiritually. And it was awesome to find this community that also shared the things I was into. But not only was it a Facebook group. It was a website and they had a Twitch channel and things like that. At the time, our YouTube channel was active, but it was just amazing to be like, wow, these people are creating content that is centric to their beliefs and their faith, and are able to pull spiritual themes from video games, movies, and so on. That they're able to look into the Bible and see those themes that are based on the greatest story ever told, as we refer to as the resurrection and of Christ and all that stuff. So it's really amazing.
That's interesting to me because for me, I grew up with a very interesting background. My grandmother, Pam Rusick. My family Rusick, we have a Polish background, so I'm Hispanic and / Polish, so that's always an interesting combination. I like pierogies and shrimp tacos. So growing up, she had a love of just World War II movies, Westerns, Godzilla movies, sci-fi. So I grew up with all these different movie themes. And, I don't talk about it often online. My family often does. There are some things that we just grew up watching and we love. Kind of nerdy, right? I don't like using that word nerdy or geeks or whatever, but if it's self-ascribed, then great. But it's not necessarily, maybe now more mainstream than it used to be, but it was not necessarily a mainstream thing. I think blockbuster movies have moved a lot of that. Marvel especially has moved some of these more unique themes to certain groups that might be interested, that has now moved into the mainstream or is more prevalent. But for me growing up, I didn't really relate to a lot of folks because what my background and the things that I watched weren't I don't want to use the word normal because I don't want to say it wasn't normal, right. But it was not the common things my friends were talking about. Yes. And so, also being a person of faith, I can relate that, there are folks who just don't understand why your interests go in that direction. So when you find a group of people that may have some common themes with their spiritual life, but also have some common themes with their just personal interests, that to me is, I think, a really interesting combination and powerful because it unites people and gives them an outlet to talk to other like-minded individuals. And I think that's absolutely fascinating.
Yes.
So let's get it out there. What are some of your favorite? What are some of your favorite video games? We'll start there.
Ooh, a big one for me, probably since the early days, is Doom, and that is a violent first-person shooter. But in my mind, I'm fighting demons. I am, it's a story of good versus evil. Which, when you get down to it, that's what the Bible is. The story of light and darkness.
So besides Doom, what are some other games? What do you feel about Fortnite? How do you feel about Fortnite these days? It's very popular.
Okay, yeah. So I've actually come to the dark side on Fortnite, as some might say. But it's one of those games that it's the easy one to pick on.
Yeah.
But in the last few years, I got into it, and I have a lot of fun with it, and that's one of my main games now.
What are some other games and titles you feel like kind of got you into gaming or are making a huge impact on the gaming community?
Another big one is Zelda Ocarina of Time. That game, my dad and my brother and I and my cousins, we beat that game all together. It was a collaborative effort when that game came out. We even named our dog Navi at one point. We got a little puppy and named her Navi after the fairy. But that game has quite a legacy now because now there's Breath of the Wild. And so it's really neat, to have the new generation have this other Zelda game that made some waves, and so it's neat to just be a part of that legacy. And that game, it was a particular time and place, and so it became a really big favorite of mine. So
Goldeneye for me,
yeah.
Back in the day was probably one of the games that got me into this idea that, because I worked with students for roughly 20 years, so working with high school students, that's the thing you have to appreciate when. Everyone's gonna have different interests, right? Some people love fishing, some people love reading, everyone has different interests. For me, I grew up without games at all. I had a Game Boy, it broke, they wouldn't fix it. So when I got older, and it was in my late 20s, that I started getting into things like, the GameCube and just Nintendo. And that was one of the big games, Goldeneye, which if you look back at it now, it's like super pixelated. It's just a step above.
a little outdated.
It really is. But it was that game that we would get together and play together, and it was just super fun. And I think that's why Halo and other games for us were super exciting.
Yeah, you're on the ground floor of the multiplayer scenes and all that. So
these days, people, when they think of gamers, they think of these folks that are super isolated, that are in a dark room, that are sort of on their own. They're these fringe folk who are just disconnected from reality, and this is their only gateway to the world. And that's not always the case. In many cases, and that seems like what y'all are doing, is that these online friends or these gaming is ultimately a platform to connect with people. Obviously, the game is the context for that, and we love the stories that are told there, the experience that we have, and how it's a great way to fill our time. But it's also the people that we meet along the way and the relationships that we form.
Yeah, and so and that's kind of why Geeks and Grace exists, like we were talking about earlier. But there are volunteer staff, writers, and Twitch streamers we have on our channels that all of us came together for a common goal, and we're all around the country, and we even have a few people out of Australia and New Zealand that volunteer, and it's just really neat and we're kind of here to show people like, hey, like this stereotype isn't always the case, and it's an easy stereotype, but we're kind of just to show people, hey, like we have these common goals, and this stuff can be used for a good cause, and it can be used to reach people.
Life can be extremely stressful, and gaming especially is an outlet for me to enjoy my time in a positive, not necessarily productive, but I'll use the word productive in that it produces good feelings and good vibes to get some of the negative energy off of me from a day. So I think it's important to have that context because people get concerned. And like anything, I think any hobby, any activity, anything that's used for good can also be bad. Working is good. Being a workaholic, maybe not so much. Yes. Right? We need to see everything in its context with moderation and I think that's partly what folks don't get. They just think it's a one-sided thing, and it's just, this is a part of my life, and it's a big part of it, but it doesn't necessarily that's a negative thing, right? It is a very positive thing for so many. Part
of what we do at Geeks and Grace is we have a lot of reviews and articles and things like that, in which at the beginning of a review, we have a content guide, and not just for somebody of faith, but maybe for parents that are saying like, oh, how much violence does this game have, or does this game have nudity or sexual content? Like, should I be playing it? Should my kids be playing it?
Yeah.
And that's one of our angles that we like to have in there.
And that's a great word for parents. It's a safe place for people to talk about these things and unpack it, because you have a perspective that someone may not, because you know some of the dangers, you know some of the things that can maybe produce negative feelings or create a bad environment for someone potentially at a young age, and you can give some insight and some wisdom to that and say, hey, listen, it's a good game, but maybe it's not age appropriate. Here's another one that's just as action packed but doesn't have some of the profanity or some of the inappropriate content based on age, which, I don't have children, but I know parents are always concerned about that, and should be, right? That's
definitely
fair. These experiences inform who people become, and what you take in absolutely shapes your thinking. So we have to be, we have to filter that. And I think that's what you guys are helping to do. So I love that.
Yeah.
Well, very cool, LJ. This is super amazing hearing about it. Again, we're going to put all the links for all of the sites and social media handles in the description below. That way folks can check it out. I highly recommend you go and follow them on all their different platforms. Man, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
Well, that's it for part 2 of this episode. It's really cool to hear about Geeks Under Grace, an awesome opportunity for believers, people of faith, and parents who are looking for a place to send their children that's safe. They can start to look at the guides and hear all this amazing stuff that they're doing to help form a community that's really positive for gamers and other enthusiasts of that kind of content. Well, we hope you enjoyed this content. If you do, don't forget to click that like button, crush the subscribe button, hit the notification bell to stay up to date with everything we are producing. As always, we hope that you're doing well. We hope you're staying safe, and we'll see you in the next one.